first thing I want to talk about is the macroeconomy. If you're reading the news every day or listening to the radio, you're getting bombarded by stuff concerning the macroeconomy. Well, a lot of it is focused on the Federal Reserve, and I want to spend a little time on this, but not a whole lot. It's certainly the case that 2 years ago, when Ben Bernanke took over as chair, the Fed had a very solid focus on fighting inflation. And as the subprime crisis clicked in and all the issues with banking and the financial markets began to overshadow any potential inflation in the economy, the Federal Reserve reversed itself. Now, theoretically, and this kind of goes back to my bubble view, theoretically, the Federal Reserve is doing exactly what they should not be doing. They are allowing the financial institutions and investors at the individual level to, in a sense, be supported by monetary policy and bail out the risk that was taken throughout the last 3 or 4 years in using those mortgage-backed securities that help spread the risk in housing for a lot of financial institutions and banking. And what it basically did is it involved investment banks in the funding of mortgages in an indirect fashion, but in a fashion that was a very large dollar figure. And so what we're seeing with the Federal Reserve now is this focus on basically restoring consumer confidence and investor confidence rather than worrying about inflation. But folks, inflation is showing its face. When I mentioned the gas price surging the way it is, that's not because the supply or the demand of gas is changing rapidly. It's because the dollar value of gas is changing vis-a-vis the falling value of our dollar internationally. So, what's really bad about that ultimately is the fact that we are going into a natural seasonal demand increase as we move into the so-called driving season in the United States. So, what does that mean? It means that the gas price is likely not to see any relief. If it's shocking you that the Chevron out here on Fraser Parkway has now moved up 45, 50 cents in the last 6 weeks in price, folks, it's just going to get worse. So prepare yourself for that. And a lot of us in here are not going to be overly affected by that, I would say. A lot of us do not really react too much to a 20% or to a 20 cent a gallon increase in gas. It may change your viewpoint, but it probably doesn't keep you from going to Starbucks, for example. Who it affects ultimately are the lower wage workers who do not have a mechanism by which to demand higher wages, nor the mobility to move from one job to the other as they open up to augment wages in such a way to fight the inflation. So that leads to one of two outcomes. They either migrate away and leave a hole in Marin County concerning how many jobs are going to be available, or how many workers are going to be available for certain jobs, and may force wages to go even higher in Marin to attract those workers and keep them. So keep that in mind. You're seeing the gas price that ultimately is going to show its face in wage demands for workers, especially at the lower levels. Okay? So, basic personal services, basic retail are all going to be threatened by a labor force wanting to migrate away if it can no longer afford to live in an area that has a relatively higher cost of living. And the gas price is just a microcosm of that higher cost. Another thing about the Federal Reserve, and then I'll move on from this, is to really think about the fact that the Federal Reserve has very little power historically over mortgage rates. I think I heard somebody talking in the back before we assembled about the fact that they've cut rates, 2.25 basis points over these last few months, and it hasn't really moved mortgage rates at all. It's because historically it doesn't have the power to do that. It affects the 5-year and 10-year T-bill rates very little when it moves those rates. And really, it's just a matter of what liquidity is going into banks, and it's a cost of funding issue. It really doesn't affect the 5-year and 10-year notes that are have other market forces against them. So when you hear the Fed is cutting rates, don't perceive that as a signal that the mortgage rate is suddenly going to go down. And the other thing is that as soon as there's any signal that rates may go up, there's going to be an increase, probably at least in refinance activity. You're probably already seeing some of that happening. That will naturally, and this is a nasty way of putting this as an economist, but as if by an invisible hand, push rates upward. So we definitely have got all kinds of pressure right now for rates to go up. And I'll talk later about a phenomenon called stagflation that we're sort of sitting on the precipice of right now at the national level, not necessarily at the local level. I talked a little bit about the slumping dollar. I put a question mark there. Is it a bad thing? The reality of it is that for this area, and to a certain extent Sonoma County, a lower dollar value provides actually a good deal for international wealth to buy real estate. So I'm going to talk about this in more depth in a little while, but think about in your mind that, the slumping dollar, when you hear it, what it does do is it hurts you traveling internationally. That's terrible. How many people here tried to travel internationally in the last 6 months? It's brutal. I went to Italy in November 2006, and I was appalled at the fact that I was paying a 27% tax on everything I bought. Now it's right around 50%. So it's really gotten bad. But again, that's the price you pay for all this liquidity. So if you're a banker and your cost of funds have gone down, that's a good thing. If you're trying to travel internationally, it's not good. But there's the best aspect of that ultimately around here is likely the industries that focus on exportation, especially our creative arts industries that have budded up here in the last 12 months locally. A lot of the movie software firms and the animation firms are actually going to see probably some surge in activity because of that, and real estate may see some of that as international wealth seeks to buy Marin County real estate. The tax rebate is likely to have very little effect. I hope you're under no suspicions that that money is going to is sort of going to be the panacea for all these problems. I try to put it in perspective here that you're talking about a $160 billion surge in a $17 trillion economy. So there's not a whole lot of percentage change as a result of that government spending. Does anybody here want to speculate as to why that's happening? Very good. You got an A for the day. Very good. Well, that's sort of the national and international picture very quickly. But because I wanted to focus on more local issues,